Crises of Humanity, Chapter-7. Thoughts on energy issues. New energy development. What is clean energy? At the beginning, I would like to note that the crisis facing human beings do not exist in the shortage of energy that is required for our mass consumption, but in the deterioration of the living environment caused by residual pollution. This is a direct consequence of the fact that our mass consumption has exceeded the Earth's purification capacity. Climate change triggered by the residual carbon dioxide pollution is one form of proof. The premise that human beings would become happier the more goods they had and the more they consumed through economic growth was an illusion. As a consequence of mass consumption, human beings have created an immense sorrow, the destruction of our very own living environment. The process involved in manufacturing goods involve eliminating impurities and waste from raw materials, deploying energy, and diffusing heat. Therefore, whenever we use energy, the heat and dirt generated both by the energy itself and the product are diffused in the atmosphere. Human beings are currently on the development of clean energy. However, even if there were an infinite volume of clean energy that never generates pollution, the biosphere would collapse from the load of the residual pollution. Pollution emitted from products that simply keep on being manufactured utilizing energy that exceeds the Earth's purification capacity. In general, pollution passes through the Earth's purification function and is returned to the original circulation of the Earth. However, there are time lags in the returning to the circulation process, depending on the type of energy and raw materials. For example, if we consume a volume of a certain substance within 5 years, which is supposed to return to the Earth's circulation in 10 years, 5 years' worth of pollution would remain as residue, and such consumption is not sustainable. Even nuclear waste will return to the Earth's circulation in units of 10,000 years. But human beings with a lifespan of only several decades could not handle the waste sustainably. The circulation that is best harmonized with the daily life of human beings is the cycle of the 4 seasons, which are complemented by a myriad living creatures. The cycle of the 4 seasons is a selfless gift bestowed from others' lives. The physiology of human beings has evolved in accordance with the grace of the 4 seasons. That might be the reason why we sense the 4 seasons beautifully. Solar energy is said to be clean. However, when the sunshine reaches the geosphere, the majority of the energy has already been consumed for the life of the Earth. Therefore, the expansive volume of energy that human beings aspire to does not remain. To collect this residual energy, use of other types of energy is required, which generates pollution that needs to be diffused. When we deduct that pollution amount, the balance would be minuscule. The volume of energy we receive as God's gifts, such as solar and wind power, is in fact low per area. Thus, vast land areas and immense facilities would be required. Energies consumed for the production or installation of those facilities should be offset from the collected solar or wind power. One of the reasons why the profitability of the development of clean energy is debatable exists in this point. If we use the sunshine as is, for example, hanging out laundry with virtually adding no labor, That is true clean energy. If human beings greedily seek clean energy that requires vast swaths of land and increased generators, forests would be slashed down, and the environment of our hometowns would deteriorate, turning the landscape into gruesome scenery. It is plainly greed rather than foolishness to destroy the forests that nurture many lives, just to pursue gratuitous solar energy. The urgent issue for us is to put our efforts into suppressing the volume of consumption to the level below the Earth's limitations, not to develop new energies. The perils of the biosphere cannot be alleviated without reverting back to that level. I would like to point out again that one feasible method is to control mass consumption by altering the flow of money through tax reformation. The best and shortest avenue we should select is to endeavor to reduce residual pollution to the level within the Earth's field by efficiently utilizing oil energy and existing facilities. Why? Among the current energy choices we have, oil is the most abundant, the easiest to use, and the cleanest. If we stick to economic growth and develop new energies utilizing resources that are dirtier than oil, we can increase GDP and employment, but the mounting pollution treatment costs would bring even greater difficulties. Human beings, through no fault but our own, would shorten the grace period until the collapse of the social-economic structure. There is a common notion that science and technologies will solve the issue of residual pollution. Basic knowledge of physics could help us to understand whether or not we can actually eliminate the pollution through science. In the expanding universe, all things must pass in one direction of time. If human beings try to revert back the diffusion of pollution through science and technology, it would cost enormous energy as the movement is against the flow of time. We may be able to erase some pollution. However, as more pollution than can be erased is being generated, the total volume of the pollution would increase. Therefore, we cannot reduce pollution through science and technology. This is a rough sketch of the law of the universe. In short, no matter how significantly science and technology advances, we would not be capable of reversing the flow of time through science and technology. Fundamental energy for life. Cyclic wheels. Mother Nature's blessing. Living creatures have been surviving several billion years, enveloped in the free gifts from heaven. They needed no money, but only exploited the instinct of solidarity to pass their hope on to the following generations. For life, their fundamental economic value for survival derives from the energy generated by the Earth's cyclical force of nature, which is gratuitously bestowed on us from Mother Nature. The Earth has two circulations, that is to say, the cycle of water linking sparkling white snow, clouds, rain, brooks, and oceans, and the cycle of life linking living creatures from trees, grasses, flowers, microorganisms, and large-sized animals. Living creatures have been surviving on Earth thanks to the generous gifts generating from the interactions between these two cycles. In other words, a gift of dynamics. The engine of the cycle of life is powered by the solar heat and the cycle of water. The heat emitted by the engine is absorbed by the cycle of water and cooled down. The evaporated water rises to the stratosphere and releases the heat to the universe. This resembles a sort of water-cooled heat engine in an automobile. This is the complementary gift from the heaven generated through the collaboration of the water and life cycles. The engine powered by the cycle of life has been proactively establishing itself in several billion years through the solidarity of all living creatures. A brief sketch of the cycle of life is: plants convert inorganic substances to food, utilizing water and solar heat, which feeds animals and turns to dirt. This dirt feeds microorganisms that convert the dirt back into inorganic substances and heat. When we create compost, heat as high as 80 degrees Celsius is generated. This heat is a phenomenon of the process through which microorganisms decompose the dirt into the original solar heat and inorganic substances. We use a rather negative term, spoil, for this process to decompose dirt executed by microorganisms. However, without microorganisms, mountains of dirt would cover the earth within a year. Soil is a dirt treatment plant in which small living creatures work voluntarily. In short, the negative term dirt is used to describe something unnecessary for human beings, but what is absolutely a must for living creatures that are waiting for the next process. Within the cycle of life created autonomously by living creatures, there exists no waste that deserves to be called dirt. Lives become food for other lives when they die. Discarded debris is decomposed by microorganisms and returned to the soil. Nutrition returned to the soil would foster plants to feed other lives. In this way, living creatures increase the species through solidarity and expand the link of the cycle of life to all the corners of the earth. A plant is in existence that fattens up and enriches the cycle of life. Utilizing solar energy, plants convert carbon dioxide in the air and water sucked from the soil through the process of photosynthesis. The output of this process becomes alimentation that fosters living creatures and simultaneously emits oxygen as a waste of the photosynthesis. Plants return water used in the photosynthesis to the atmosphere as moisture vapor. The cause of abundant rain over the forest is the rich moisture generated by plants. Plants are playing a principal role in the cycle of carbon and oxygen and heat provided by the sun. In other words, plants are the springhead of life generated by the cycle of life. On the other hand, the cycle of water absorbs the heat returned through the decomposition of dirt executed by microorganisms, vaporizes, and climbs up into the atmosphere to release the heat to the outside of the earth. Evaporation is a mysterious power, a gigantic but completely free gift that is hoisting water as heavy as 500 trillion tons per year against the force of gravity. The hoisted moisture is cooled down in the stratosphere. Releasing heat, the moisture becomes clouds, rain, and snow. Clouds are actually an immense reservoir floating in the air. Blessed rain and snow return to the soil to wet the bodies of living creatures and absorb heat and dirt to nurture their lives. Snow is an even more precious existence than water, as it absorbs more heat. Therefore, virgin white snow looks beautiful to human beings. Anything good for life looks beautiful. Through this flow of heat, all the circulations on the earth link to the greater circulation of the universe. This denotes that our bodies, a tiny part of this cycle of life, are linked to the great universe through the heat. Until a couple of centuries ago, when human beings encountered fossil fuel that derives from living creatures, human beings have been living within the gifts granted us by the gratuitous circulation. The value that the cycle of life brings to us is comprised of the gratuitous labor of living creatures, food, and the nurturing of lives. These are the gifts living creatures receive from the gratuitous energy continuously being emitted. Modern economics has defined value as something that is convertible to money through the market. While modern economics regards greed, an illusion that varies from time to time, as a driving force of the society, it judges the gifts granted by a heat engine, the Earth's circulation, to be valueless in the market as they are free of charge. However, I believe that its history has been one of extravagance and the destruction of the very elemental structure of the circulation. The dynamics of the cycle of life are similar to a beautiful tapestry woven using a single thread spun through the solidarity of life, which is extremely delicate, and even a tiny fray would expand through chain reaction. It seems very bizarre to have an economic activity that satisfied humans' transient greed, even up to the extent that requires us to destroy the precious gifts from the cycle of life and water. Wisdom, something that human beings are proud of, is bestowed to us so that we could pass on the living environment with its bountiful circulation to the generations following us in the future to come. I believe that our role as living creatures should be to foster and raise these bountiful free cycles of nature, utilizing our cerebral function, unique to human beings. The reason why political and business establishments oppose environmental conservation treaties is because such a treaty would affect the current economy. However, the economy they're talking about only spans the period equivalent to their transitory term and lacks the concept of the future. For these short-sighted reasons, they are destroying the welcome blessing of God in long run through such actions as deforestation and construction of dams. Does it sell well at the market or not? Human beings who have grown accustomed to measuring the value of life by the amount of money they have even tend to measure spirits using money. If we can measure our mind using money, why don't we measure not only parts, but the entire cycles of life and water by properly converting to the monetary utilizing a supercomputer value in the long run? The value of these circulations, which are virtually intangible, is difficult to measure. However, since money itself is an illusion, this, even in a rough calculation, would be one road toward revolution onto true economics that regards gratuitous value as value. Human beings have not been enlightened by the fact that we are alive thanks to other lives. But this very economics would enlighten human beings about the solidarity of lives. We old people cannot depart this world without tackling efforts to revive the once damaged Earth's circulations and hand them over to the following generation of lives. Trends in Earth's environmental issues. The impact of consumption on the Earth. I have searched through academic archives and identified concerned trends. Forgive me if it seems a bit dull, like studying notes, but my aim is to enable the reader to succinctly comprehend the general trend. Circa 1950 AD, dawn of the mass consumption era. Commercial nuclear power plants start operations. 1945 AD, Japan's surrender. Circa 1960 AD, advent of mass transportation, chemical substances, smoke and soot, and pollution in the oceans and rivers started eroding Earth's natural cycle. Silent Spring, that alerted on the risk of chemical substances diffusion was published. Circa 1970 AD, Secretary-General of the United Nations issued a warning. Unless all countries globally cooperate to implement countermeasures within 10 years, the Earth's environment would deteriorate to an irreversible status. At just about the same time, The Limits to Growth was published and warned that consumption could not surpass the Earth's capacity. Japan quickly recovered from the defeat in World War II and became the world's number 2 in GNP. 2 times oil shocks hit the world, a warning about economic growth. Human beings could have been enjoying sustainable and satisfactory lives if we had taken countermeasures vis-a-vis these warnings. However, the world didn't budge, even at hearing the oil shock warnings. Circa 1980 AD, human beings' mass consumption had exceeded the limitations that could be sustained by one Earth. Since then, consumption attributable to the marginal increase in GDP has been remaining as residual pollution. The ice in the northern hemisphere started melting down visibly, and living species started drastically disappearing. These visual changes on the Earth are evidence that human beings' mass consumption has exceeded our planet, Earth's limitations. Carbon dioxide density in the atmosphere in this decade was 340 parts per million, which is said to be the upper limit for the existence of the ice in the northern hemisphere. Synchronized with the carbon dioxide density, the air temperature has gradually increased. As a result, the ice in the northern hemisphere is headed toward obliteration, and the sea level is slowly but steadily increasing at a pace by which it will rise 25 meters within several centuries. Circa 1990 AD, the Earth Summit failed to generate the outcomes that had been hoped for. More than 1,000 prominent scientists from all over the world jointly issued a warning. Immediate and drastic change is a must. Unless we can control our greed, the world will metamorphose into one that cannot sustain life. But the warning was disregarded. Extreme weather became widespread, and unprecedented phenomena in aerological weather and the environment further advanced. 2000 AD, human beings consumed 1.2 times as much as the Earth's capacity. Naturally, the 0.2 portion remained as residual pollution. Antarctic ice shelves started collapsing. Although the Kyoto Protocol came into force, some major carbon dioxide emitting countries withdrew from or refused to ratify the treaty. The market in carbon dioxide emission rights did not work efficiently, and the density of carbon dioxide has further increased. While conferences were simply going on, human beings did not undertake countermeasures. Aspirations for economic growth were further stoked. 2013 AD, IPCC announced that the air temperature would rise by 2.6 to 4.8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Living species had faced the peril of total extinction 5 times every 100 million years. Living species are disappearing at a pace hundreds of times as fast as the past 5 experiences. It is safe to say that living creatures are now on the verge of the 6th annihilation. 2015 AD. Carbon dioxide density in the air exceeds 400 parts per million and is rising at a pace of 2 parts per million per annum. 25 years from now, by 2040 AD, the density would exceed 450 parts per million. The chronological table below sketches the history of the ice. 1 degree Celsius increase in the air temperature denotes a gradual 5 meters rise in the sea level. When the density of carbon dioxide in the air exceeds 340 parts per million, the air temperature would increase by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius in a synchronized manner. The ice in the northern hemisphere would disappear, and the sea level would rise by 25 meters. If the density further increases and exceeds 450 parts per million, the air temperature would increase by 4 to 5 degrees Celsius in a synchronized manner, and all of the ice on Earth would be on the verge of total disappearance. The sea level would rise by 70 plus meters, which would continue in units of 10,000 years. Note, pace of the sea level increase. There is evidence in the past 130,000 years of history that the sea level rose by 5 meters in 100 years, caused by a natural increase of 1 degree Celsius. If the air temperature surges by 5 degrees Celsius within this century, the pace at which the sea level rises would accelerate. Human beings have used up their grace period in which they could have crafted valid, full-fledged countermeasures. We are in an awful stage where we have no idea whether or not, or even how, we could hand over a less deteriorated biosphere to the generations following us. Circa 2020 AD, environmental conservation measures, which were supposed to be sufficient in 1980, would become completely useless in 2020 due to the aggregated residual pollution over 40 years. Human beings are consuming not only natural resources, but also time simultaneously. Circa 2030 AD, human beings will face a series of impasses in natural resources and pollution, and various adversities would stampede toward us all at the same time. The global social economic structure would very likely collapse, including sovereign bankruptcy. Unless human beings revert back to the limitations of the Earth's natural cycle, the longer we wait to take countermeasures, the more seriously our quality of life would deteriorate. The more we wait, the greater society's collapse will be. That collapse would happen in an instant. Circa 2040 AD. Finally, carbon dioxide density will exceed 450 parts per million. Once this threshold is exceeded, the air temperature would rise by 4 to 5 degrees Celsius, and all of the ice on the planet would gradually disappear. Our destiny is a world with a sea level more than 70 meters higher than now. Circa 2050 AD, our children and grandchildren might be forced to live foul lives amidst the residual pollution. Circa 2070 AD, I cannot even imagine the condition of the biosphere at that stage. Human beings' longevity would probably be significantly shortened, caused by various physical influences, and the population of human beings on the planet would face obliteration. End of Chapter 7.